The black ice sent Grace Mitchell's car sliding sideways across the empty industrial road. Through the February blizzard, she glimpsed a dark shape against the snowbank, motionless, almost invisible if not for the faint whimper cutting through the howling wind. Grace's hands trembled on the wheel. 20 minutes until her final job interview, her last chance before bankruptcy. But that sound, desperate, primal, pulled at something deep within her chest. She stopped. The German Shepherd lay curled in the snow, her swollen belly revealing late pregnancy. Frozen tears crystallized on her muzzle. As Grace knelt, the dog did something extraordinary with trembling paws. She pushed forward a worn leather collar, its brass nameplate reading Aurora, the phone number below worn to illegibility. Their eyes met. In Aurora's amber gaze, Grace saw not just desperation, but trust, the kind that breaks hearts or saves them. Aurora's labored breathing quickened. The puppies were coming. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Grace Mitchell had moved to Winter Haven, Illinois, seeking refuge from memories that haunted every Chicago street corner. At 32, the graphic designer had lost everything that mattered 18 months ago when Marcus's car hit black ice on Interstate 90. No children to carry his legacy, just an empty apartment and sympathetic looks from colleagues until the company downsized her position last month. The savings account dwindled daily, each rejection email another weight on her chest. But Grace knew about survival. Abandoned at 3 weeks old at St. Mary's Hospital, she'd navigated 11 foster homes before aging out of the system. She'd built herself from nothing once before, though lately, the depression whispered that maybe some people weren't meant to keep what they built. The dog struggling in the snow, Aurora carried her own story in every scar. The marks along her ribs weren't from human cruelty, but from fence wire. Desperate passages through hostile territory. A former therapy dog at Montreal Children's Hospital. She'd belonged to Lily Henderson, a young nurse who'd died 2 years ago saving a child from a frozen pond. Since then, Aurora had traveled over 500 miles, following some invisible map toward home. Somewhere during those harsh months, another stray had found her. Now 7 lives grew within her exhausted body. From his kitchen window, Walter Henderson watched Grace lift the dog he recognized instantly. The 72-year-old Korean War veteran's hands shook against his coffee mug. Aurora, his granddaughter Lily's beloved companion. He'd searched for months after Lily's funeral, when the dog had vanished from the backyard. Walter had trained military canines for 30 years, saved countless men with his dogs, earned a Purple Heart when shrapnel tore through his shoulder defending his unit's messenger dog. But he couldn't save Lily, couldn't find Aurora. Now both had returned to Winter Haven in the arms of a stranger. He stood frozen, unable to move, unable to call out. 2 years of grief had taught him that sometimes miracles came disguised as coincidences. Emma Brooks would understand miracles. The veterinarian had been Grace's only friend since the move, the only person who didn't require explanations for sudden tears. Emma fought her own battle. The veterinary board had suspended her license for providing free emergency care to pets of undocumented immigrants, unprofessional conduct they'd called compassion. She kept fighting for reinstatement, knowing Winter Haven needed her, especially on nights like this when the roads would trap her 20 miles from where Grace was about to need her most. Grace stared at her phone. 3:47 p.m. The interview at Brennan Design started at 4:15. It was her last opportunity, 6 weeks of applications, and this was the only callback. The hiring manager had been explicit. Don't be late. We value punctuality above all else. Her checking account held $900. Next month's rent was $1,200. Aurora's whimper cut through her calculations. The dog tried to stand, her legs buckling under the weight of her pregnant belly. 70 pounds of desperate trust collapsed back into the snow. Grace looked at the road ahead, clear now. 10 minutes to the interview if she left immediately. She looked back at Aurora. The dog's eyes weren't begging anymore. They were accepting. As if she understood that hope was just another luxury she couldn't afford. "Damn it," Grace whispered. "Killing the engine. Lifting Aurora required every muscle Grace had forgotten existed. The dog didn't fight, didn't panic. Instead, she pressed her massive head against Grace's shoulder, breathing in shaky rhythms that spoke of exhaustion beyond measure. Grace's back screamed as she navigated the icy ground. Her interview suit, the only professional outfit she still owned, soaked through with snow and the unmistakable musk of desperate animal. The 15 feet to her car felt like miles. Aurora made soft sounds, not quite whines, more like apologies for the burden she'd become. When Grace finally got the back door open, Aurora summoned strength from somewhere deep and climbed in herself, immediately curling into the footwell as if trying to become smaller, less trouble. During the drive home, Aurora performed an act of trust that shattered Grace's composure. The dog, despite never having met this human before, crawled forward and rested her enormous head on Grace's lap while she drove. Not demanding, just connecting. Grace felt warm tears she didn't remember starting to cry freeze on her cheeks. Walter Henderson stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug suspended halfway to his lips. That was Aurora, Lily's Aurora, the dog who'd slept beside his granddaughter's bed every night, who'd walked her to the bus stop every morning, who'd howled for 3 days straight after the funeral. He should run outside, should call out, should do something. But his feet remained planted on the worn linoleum. 2 years of grief had taught him that feeling nothing was safer than feeling everything. He watched Grace carry Aurora inside the small rental house across the street. Watched her struggle with the door. Watched Aurora's tail attempt a weak wag. His chest tightened with recognition and something else, shame, perhaps, for his cowardice. Inside her home, Grace transformed Marcus's memory into Aurora's salvation. His old University of Chicago sweatshirts, the ones she'd been unable to donate, became nesting material. The box from their never-assembled crib purchased the week before the accident, before the miscarriage that preceded his death, finally found purpose as a whelping box. She positioned it near the heating vent in the bedroom, where Marcus used to complain about being too warm. At 2 a.m., Aurora's labor began with a sound that was almost human in its desperation. Grace jolted awake to find the dog standing in the whelping box, her sides heaving with contractions. The emergency call to Emma went straight to the weather alert she'd recorded. Doc Brooks is unavailable due to road closures. For emergencies, please. Grace hung up. YouTube videos on dog birth played on her phone as Aurora's contractions intensified. The first puppy emerged at 2:47 a.m., followed quickly by 5 more. Each one Aurora cleaned with exhausted dedication, her tongue working even as her body trembled with effort. Grace counted 6 healthy puppies, all breathing, all nursing. Then Aurora cried out differently, sharp, panicked. The 7th puppy came breech, and Aurora was too exhausted to help. Grace reached for the door, desperate for anyone, when Walter appeared on her porch with a military medical kit. "I saw the lights," he said simply, pushing past her to Aurora. His hands, steady from decades of field medicine, guided the final puppy free. But it wasn't breathing, wasn't moving. Aurora whimpered, trying to reach her baby. Walter cleared the puppy's airways with practiced efficiency, performing compressions on the tiny chest. "Come on, soldier," he whispered. 30 seconds. 60. Aurora dragged herself over, licking the puppy's face between Walter's compressions. Finally a squeak, then a cry. The 7th puppy, smallest but fierce, gulped air and life. Aurora's exhausted tail managed 3 thumps against the box. She looked at Grace and Walter with ancient gratitude, then gathered all 7 puppies against her belly, her eyes never leaving the humans who'd become her salvation. 3 days passed in a blur of feeding schedules and sleepless nights. Grace had called Brennan Design to explain her absence, but the secretary's cold response said everything the position had been filled. She sat on the living room floor, watching Aurora nurse her 7 puppies, when Walter knocked on her door. The old veteran stood in her doorway holding a worn photo album, his hands trembling not from age but from something deeper. "I need to tell you about that dog," he said, his voice cracking on the last word. Grace invited him in, and Walter sat heavily on her couch, opening the album with reverent care. The first photo showed a young woman with dark hair laughing as a younger Aurora licked her face. "This is my granddaughter, Lily," Walter said. "That's her dog you've got there, Aurora." The story spilled out like water through a broken dam. Lily Henderson had been 28, a pediatric nurse at Winter Haven General, the only family Walter had left after losing his wife and son years before. She'd adopted Aurora as a puppy, trained her as a therapy dog for the children's ward. "Those kids loved them both," Walter whispered. "Lily had this way of making dying children laugh. Aurora would do these little tricks, and even the sickest kids would smile." 2 winters ago, Lily had been walking Aurora around Winter Haven Lake when she heard screaming. A boy had fallen through the ice. Witnesses said Lily didn't hesitate. She gave Aurora the stay command, dropped her coat, and went in after the child. She got him to safety, pushed him onto solid ice where others could reach him, but the effort exhausted her. The current pulled her under before anyone could help. Aurora waited by that lake for 3 days. Walter continued, tears flowing freely now. "Wouldn't leave, wouldn't eat. I finally got her home, but the morning after the funeral, she was gone. I searched everywhere, put up posters from here to Chicago. Nothing." He looked at Aurora, who had lifted her head at the sound of his voice. "I thought I'd lost the last piece of Lily I had left." Grace felt the room spin as Walter turned to a later page in the album. There was another photo, Lily in scrubs at a hospital bedside. Grace recognized the room immediately. The patient in the bed was Marcus, her Marcus, during his final hours. "That's your husband," Walter said softly. It wasn't a question. "Lily told me about him, said he talked about his wife Grace until the very end, said she held his hand when." Walter stopped, seeing Grace's face crumble. Lily was there. She made sure he wasn't alone. The revelation hung between them like a bridge across grief. Grace reached for Aurora, who carefully stepped over her puppies to press against Grace's side. They sat in silence until a sharp knock shattered the moment. Margaret Hayes stood on the porch, her steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, her coat worth more than Grace's monthly rent. Behind her stood a man in a cheap suit holding official-looking papers. "I'm here for my dog," Margaret announced, pushing past Grace into the house. She saw Aurora and the puppies, her thin lips curving into a satisfied smile. "There you are, Duchess. You've cost me a fortune, you stupid mutt." Aurora's reaction was immediate and visceral. She positioned herself between her puppies and Margaret, a low growl rumbling from her chest, the first aggressive sound Grace had heard from her. "This isn't your dog," Grace said, finding her voice. "This is Aurora. She belonged to Lily Henderson." Margaret laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Duchess has been mine for 3 years. I have the papers right here." She thrust documents at Grace. "Purebred German Shepherd, registered name Duchess von Heidelberg. Escaped from my breeding facility 6 months ago while pregnant with a litter worth $15,000. Walter erupted from the couch with more speed than his age suggested. "You lying witch, that's Lily's dog. I've got photos from when she was a puppy." "Photos mean nothing," Margaret's lawyer interjected. "We have registration papers, veterinary records, and a microchip number. This dog is legally Mrs. Hayes's property, as are the puppies." Grace examined the papers. They looked official, but something felt wrong. The dates showed registration 3 years ago, but Aurora would have already been with Lily then. "These dates don't make sense," she said. "Sense doesn't matter. Law matters," Margaret replied. "I'll give you 48 hours to wean those puppies. Then I'm taking my property back. Or we can do this through the courts, where you'll also owe me damages for unauthorized care of my breeding stock." Walter's face turned purple with rage. "Breeding stock, you heartless." Grace grabbed his arm before he could lunge at Margaret. "Get out of my house," Grace said quietly. Margaret smiled coldly. 48 hours. My lawyer will file papers tomorrow if you refuse." She looked at Aurora with calculating eyes. 7 puppies, German Shepherd purebreds. That's $21,000 you're harboring. Bit. After Margaret left, Walter collapsed back onto the couch, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. She can't take Aurora, she can't. Grace looked at Aurora, who had returned to her puppies but kept her eyes on the door, vigilant and afraid. She won't, Grace said, surprising herself with her conviction. I lost my husband. You lost your granddaughter. Aurora lost her person. We're not losing anything else. That night, as Walter helped move the whelping box to a more secure corner of the house, Aurora did something remarkable. She picked up the smallest puppy, the one who'd almost died, and placed it gently in Walter's lap. Then she returned to the others, as if saying, "This one is yours to protect." "We're going to fight," Grace told Emma over the phone later. "I don't care if I lose everything." "Margaret Hayes owns half this town," Emma warned. "She's got judges in her pocket. You sure you want this war?" Grace looked at Aurora, at Walter asleep in her recliner with the tiny puppy on his chest, at the 6 other puppies nursing contentedly. She thought about Lily, who'd given everything to save a stranger's child, about Marcus, who'd died with Lily holding his hand, about connections that transcended documentation. "It's not a war," Grace said. "It's a rescue mission." The Winter Haven County Courthouse hadn't seen crowds like this since the mayor's corruption trial 5 years ago. Margaret Hayes had arrived with not 1 but 3 lawyers from Chicago's Preston, Keller and Associates, their combined hourly rate exceeding what most townspeople made in a month. Grace sat at the defendant's table with Sarah Coleman, a public defender fresh from law school, whose idealism hadn't yet been crushed by reality. "Your Honor," Margaret's lead attorney, Richard Preston himself, addressed Judge Morrison. "This is a simple property case. Mrs. Hayes has provided registration documents, veterinary records spanning 3 years, and a microchip number that corresponds to the dog in question. The defendant has admitted in writing on social media, no less, to taking possession of this valuable animal without attempting to locate its rightful owner." Sarah stood, her voice shaking slightly. "Your Honor, we contest the validity of these documents. Aurora, the dog in question, has been documented as belonging to Lily Henderson since she was 8 weeks old. We have photographic evidence, witness testimonies, and photos can be doctored, witnesses can lie." Preston interrupted smoothly. "We have legal documentation. That's what matters in a court of law." Judge Morrison, a severe woman in her 60s, reviewed the papers. "Ms. Coleman, do you have registration papers? Veterinary records? Any legal documentation that predates Mrs. Hayes's claim?" Sarah's silence said everything. Grace had spent 72 hours searching through Lily's belongings with Walter, but found only photos, videos, and love. Nothing that would stand up to Margaret's fabricated paper trail. "I'm inclined to grant immediate return of the animal," Judge Morrison began, but the courtroom doors burst open. Emma Brooks strode in, her veterinary license suspension making her presence questionable, but her determination undeniable. "Your Honor, I need to present evidence regarding the systematic falsification of breeding records at Mrs. Hayes's facility." Preston objected immediately. "Dr. Brooks has no standing here. She's not even legally permitted to practice veterinary medicine." "Because I helped poor people," Emma shot back. "But I can still recognize fraud when I see it." The courtroom erupted. Margaret's supporters, mostly business owners who relied on her patronage, shouted about property rights and law and order. Grace's supporters, younger residents, animal lovers, and those who'd known Lily, demanded justice over jurisprudence. Judge Morrison gabbled repeatedly for order. That afternoon, Grace uploaded a video to social media that would change everything. It showed Aurora recognizing Walter, the moment she'd brought him the smallest puppy, her terror when Margaret appeared. Within 6 hours, it had 2 million views. Justice for Aurora began trending. National news picked up the story. Small town, big fight, when property rights clash with what's right. The story split down predictable yet passionate lines. Conservative commentators argued that property rights were the foundation of American freedom. "If we start ignoring legal ownership based on feelings," one pundit declared, "where does it end?" Liberal voices countered that the law should recognize the bonds between animals and their true families. A dog isn't a car or a couch. A popular blogger wrote, Aurora chose her family. Margaret made the mistake of appearing on a morning show, where she referred to Aurora as breeding stock and suggested that emotional attachments to animals are for people who can't maintain human relationships. The clip went viral for all the wrong reasons, but in Winter Haven, the battle turned uglier. Grace woke one morning to find "Thief" spray painted on her garage door. Walter's front window was broken by a rock with a note, "Dog stealing communist." Emma's clinic, already struggling without her license, lost 3 major accounts after Margaret made phone calls, suggesting that association with criminal elements was bad for business. The support came too, though quieter at first. Father Charles Williams from St. Anthony's organized prayer circles for justice and compassion. The local hardware store owner, Tom Mitchell, no relation to Grace, refused Margaret's business after she demanded he fire a clerk who'd shared Grace's video. "I don't need money that dirty," he said publicly, knowing it would cost him. The town council called an emergency meeting that devolved into chaos. Council member Janet Price, whose daughter had been one of Lily's patients, made an impassioned speech about Lily's legacy. "That girl saved my daughter's life not medically, but spiritually. Aurora was part of that healing. You want to hand that dog over to someone who sees her as a cash machine." Margaret's ally, Council member Robert Hayes, no relation despite the shared surname, countered with cold economics. Mrs. Hayes employs 40 people at her various businesses. She pays more taxes than any 3 other citizens combined. Are we really going to alienate her over a dog? "Yes," said Janet simply, and half the room erupted in applause while the other half booed. The investigation started accidentally. Nathan Torres, a 17-year-old computer whiz whose younger sister had been one of Lily's patients, couldn't sleep after seeing Aurora's story. He started digging into Margaret's business records, legally accessible public documents. He'd insist later and found discrepancies. Dogs that were supposedly sold appeared in breeding records years later. Insurance claims for dogs that allegedly died but then showed up in sale advertisements. Nathan brought his findings to Emma, who recognized the pattern immediately. "She's double-dipping," Emma explained to Grace and Walter. "Claiming insurance payouts for dogs that died, then selling them or using them for breeding? That's fraud." In Darnell, Emma reached out to her contacts from veterinary school, including Dr. Marie Dubois in Montreal, who ran the Canadian Therapy Dog Certification Program. Marie confirmed what they'd suspected. Aurora had been certified as a therapy dog 4 years ago, registered to Lily Henderson. The registration predated Margaret's claims by a full year. "But there's something else," Marie said over video call. "We had a German Shepherd named Duchess in our program 5 years ago. She was stolen from a transport van heading to her placement. The owner, Margaret Hayes, collected a massive insurance payout." The pieces clicked together. Margaret had been stealing dogs, creating false papers, collecting insurance, then using the dogs for breeding. Aurora, the real Duchess, had been one of her victims, somehow ending up with Lily instead of at Margaret's facility. Emma also discovered that Dr. Russell, Margaret's personal veterinarian, had been signing health certificates without examining the animals. "I've seen his signature on documents for 17 puppies supposedly examined in a single hour," Emma told Sarah Coleman. "That's physically impossible." The investigation took a darker turn when Richard Hayes, Margaret's estranged husband, contacted Grace secretly. "She's got more than paperwork problems," he said over coffee at a diner 2 towns over, constantly checking the door. "Some of those dogs she claims died. They didn't die natural deaths. When they couldn't breed anymore, she disposed of them." Grace's hands shook. "You're saying she killed them?" "I'm saying I found 7 dogs buried in our backwoods that were supposedly cremated according to insurance documents," Richard replied. "I've been documenting everything, waiting for the right moment. Your situation might be it." But as the investigation gained momentum, the smallest puppy, the one Walter had saved, now named Hope, developed a rattling cough. Within hours, she was struggling to breathe. The local vet, intimidated by Margaret's influence, initially refused to see her. I can't lose my practice, Dr. Anderson said apologetically. Margaret owns my building. Grace maxed out her last credit card driving Hope to a veterinary hospital in Chicago. Pneumonia, they diagnosed. Treatable but expensive. The estimate came to $3,000. I don't have it, Grace told the vet tech, tears streaming. But this puppy, she's special. She almost died being born. She can't die now. The tech, moved by Grace's desperation, whispered, "Let me talk to my supervisor. We might have a payment plan." Meanwhile, Walter had made a decision. He drove to the bank and listed his truck for sale. "It's just sitting there," he told the banker. "Lily would want me to help." The Winter Haven community rallied in unexpected ways. Tom Mitchell organized a bake sale that raised $800 in one afternoon. Father William's congregation contributed another $1,000. Even some of Margaret's former supporters, disturbed by her morning show appearance, quietly slipped checks under Grace's door. Emma, despite her suspension, snuck into her old clinic at night to steal antibiotics. "They can't take my license twice," she reasoned, preparing IV fluids for Hope. The crisis peaked when Margaret appeared at Grace's door with a sheriff's deputy. "I'm done waiting. I want my property now." Aurora, weak from nursing and stress, stood between Margaret and her puppies. For the first time, she bared her teeth. The deputy, Jim Harrison, looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, there's a court hearing scheduled. We can't just—" "I own that dog," Margaret shrieked. "She's worth thousands. Those puppies are worth thousands." "Is that all they are to you?" Grace asked quietly. "Money." Margaret's mask slipped completely. "What else would they be? Stupid animals that eat money and make messes. But they breed. And idiots pay fortune for the puppies. That's all they're good for." Jim Harrison's expression changed. He'd grown up with dogs, trained them, loved them. "Ma'am, I think we should wait for the court's decision." Margaret turned on him. "You work for this county, and I own this county. Do your job or lose it." Jim straightened his shoulders. "I took an oath to uphold the law, ma'am, not your interpretation of it." That night, Hope's fever broke. The tiny puppy, fighter from her first breath, opened her eyes and weakly wagged her tail. Aurora, who hadn't left her side, began grooming her with renewed energy. Grace posted the update online. "Hope lives up to her name." The response was immediate. Donations poured in from across the country. A GoFundMe exceeded its goal in 12 hours. Letters arrived from people who'd lost pets, who'd fought custody battles, who'd stood up to bullies with money and influence. One letter stood out, from an FBI agent named Rachel Torres, Nathan's older sister. "We've been investigating Margaret Hayes for 2 years. Your situation might be the breakthrough we need. Keep fighting. Help is coming." February 28th arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made every detail sharp enough to cut. The Winter Haven County Courthouse steps were packed by 7 in the morning, though the hearing wasn't until 9. National news vans lined the street. Someone had organized therapy dogs to stand with their handlers in silent support, creating a living wall of German shepherds, golden retrievers, and mixed breeds wearing vests that read, "Justice for Aurora." Inside courtroom 3, every seat was filled. Judge Eleanor Morrison, known for her strict interpretation of law over emotion, reviewed the documents before her with characteristic thoroughness. Her reputation preceded her. She'd once ruled against her own cousin in a property dispute because the law was clear, regardless of fairness. Margaret Hayes sat at the plaintiff's table like a queen holding court, her 3 lawyers arranged around her like expensive armor. She wore a conservative black suit that probably cost more than Grace's monthly rent, her gray hair pulled back in a style that suggested authority and righteousness. Grace felt small at the defendant's table. Sarah Coleman, her public defender, shuffled papers nervously. At 26, Sarah had passion but little experience. This was her first case to draw media attention, and her hands trembled as she arranged her notes. Grace wore her only remaining professional outfit, a navy dress she'd bought for Marcus's funeral. Walter sat directly behind them in his Korean War veteran's cap, his jaw set with military determination. "This court will come to order," Judge Morrison announced, her gavel falling like judgment itself. "We're here regarding the ownership dispute of one German Shepherd dog and 7 puppies. Mr. Preston, you may present your case." Richard Preston stood with practiced elegance. "Your Honor, this case is remarkably simple. Mrs. Hayes has provided irrefutable documentation, registration papers dating back 3 years, veterinary records from Dr. Russell's clinic, and a microchip number that matches the dog in question. The defendant admits taking possession of this valuable animal without attempting to locate its owner. She's posted multiple social media updates celebrating her rescue of what is legally Mrs. Hayes' property." Preston placed each document before the judge with theatrical precision. The emotional arguments from the defendant's supporters are touching but irrelevant. The law doesn't recognize feelings. It recognizes ownership. Mrs. Hayes owns this dog, legally and completely. Sarah Coleman stood, her voice starting weak but gaining strength. "Your Honor, we dispute the authenticity of these documents. Aurora, that's her real name, not Duchess, belonged to Lily Henderson, who tragically died 2 years ago. We have photographic evidence spanning 4 years, witness testimonies from hospital staff who saw Aurora working as a therapy dog, and photographs prove nothing." Preston interrupted. "Anyone can take a picture with a dog. Witnesses can be mistaken or motivated by sympathy. Where are your legal documents, Ms. Coleman?" Sarah's silence stretched painfully. Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Ms. Coleman, do you have any legal documentation that predates Mrs. Hayes' claim?" "We're still investigating irregularities in Mrs. Hayes' paperwork," Sarah said weakly. "Investigations aren't evidence," Judge Morrison replied. "I'm inclined to rule." The courtroom doors opened with dramatic timing. Dr. T. Marie Dubois entered, her Canadian accent cutting through the murmur of surprise. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. I am Dr. Marie Dubois, Director of the Canadian Therapy Dog Certification Program. I drove through the night from Montreal because this case involves a dog I personally certified." Preston objected immediately. "This witness wasn't disclosed. We haven't had time to verify credentials or prepare cross-examination. I have documentation that will prove Mrs. Hayes is lying," Dr. Dubois said firmly. She approached the bench, offering a folder to Judge Morrison. "Aurora was certified as a therapy dog 4 years ago, registered to Lily Henderson. I have the original paperwork, including paw prints and DNA samples we keep for all certified therapy dogs. The registration predates Mrs. Hayes' claims by a full year." The courtroom erupted. Margaret's face flushed red, then went pale. Preston huddled with his associates, whispering furiously. "Dr. Dubois continued. "Moreover, we had a German Shepherd named Duchess in our program 5 years ago. She was stolen from a transport van. The insurance claim was filed by Margaret Hayes. She collected $75,000 for that deceased dog." "That's a different dog," Margaret shrieked, jumping to her feet. "You can't prove anything." Judge Morrison gabbled for order. "Mrs. Hayes, you'll control yourself or be removed from my courtroom." Walter stood slowly in the gallery, pulling out a worn leather journal. "Your Honor, may I approach?" Judge Morrison nodded. Walter's steps were measured, deliberate, each one carrying the weight of his grief. "This is my granddaughter Lily's diary. She wrote about Aurora every day. May I read one entry?" "Objection," Preston said. "Hearsay. The author can't be cross-examined." "She can't be cross-examined because she died saving a child," Walter said, his voice breaking. "But her words are still true." Judge Morrison considered. "I'll allow it, subject to authentication." Walter opened the diary with shaking hands. December 15th, 2 years ago. Aurora did something amazing today. Mrs. Morrison's daughter Emma was in for chemotherapy. Walter looked up at the judge, whose face had gone still. Emma was scared, crying. Aurora climbed right into the bed with her, against all hospital rules. But Emma stopped crying. She hugged Aurora and smiled for the first time in weeks. Sometimes love matters more than rules. Judge Morrison's professional mask cracked. Her daughter Emma had survived childhood leukemia. She remembered that day. Remembered the German shepherd who'd given her daughter comfort when nothing else could. Margaret couldn't contain herself. "This is ridiculous. That dog is my property. I have papers, legal papers. You can't let emotions override law." "Your papers are forgeries," a young voice called from the gallery. Nathan Torres stood up, holding a laptop. "I have proof." Preston objected violently. "Your Honor, this is a circus unvetted witnesses appearing randomly. I hacked her email," Nathan said bluntly. "During the recess. I know it's illegal. Arrest me if you want. But people need to see this." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Judge Morrison gabbled repeatedly. "Young man, you've just admitted to a federal crime." "I don't care," Nathan said. "My sister had cancer. Lily and Aurora visited her every week for a year. They're the reason she kept fighting. Margaret Hayes is connected to a dog fighting ring. I have emails proving she's been stealing dogs, claiming insurance, then selling them to fighting operations." Sarah Coleman seized the moment. "Your Honor, if this evidence suggests criminal activity, shouldn't law enforcement be involved?" As if on cue, FBI agent Rachel Torres entered the courtroom, badge visible. "Judge Morrison, I'm Agent Torres with the FBI's Organized Crime Division. We've been investigating Mrs. Hayes for 2 years regarding interstate animal trafficking and insurance fraud. This young man," she looked at Nathan with a mixture of pride and frustration, "accessed evidence we've been trying to legally obtain. We were preparing warrants, but given these developments, we need to take Mrs. Hayes into custody." Margaret bolted for the door. She made it 3 steps before Agent Torres and another FBI agent intercepted her. "Margaret Hayes, you're under arrest for interstate fraud, animal trafficking, and conspiracy to operate an illegal animal fighting enterprise." "This is persecution," Margaret screamed as they handcuffed her. "That dog is worth thousands. Those puppies are worth a fortune. You're stealing from me." "Ma'am," Agent Torres said calmly, "you just confirmed on record that your interest is purely financial. That's going to help our case considerably." As Margaret was led away, still screaming about property rights and persecution, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Morrison looked at the document Dr. Dubois had provided, then at Walter still holding Lily's diary, then at Grace, who had remained silent through the chaos. "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Morrison said, "is there anything you'd like to add?" Grace stood slowly, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "Your Honor, I found Aurora in a snowstorm on Valentine's Day. She was dying. She pushed her collar toward me, not begging for food, but begging for help for her unborn puppies. I gave up a job interview to save her. It cost me everything financially, but—" Grace's voice broke. "But I'm pregnant. I didn't know it then. But I know it now. Aurora somehow knew. She trusted me with her babies. And I'm trusting the law to recognize that some bonds transcend paperwork." Sarah Coleman's eyes widened. This was new information, unplanned, but powerful. The gallery murmured with sympathy and surprise. Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "The court will recess for 1 hour while I review all evidence, including the criminal implications revealed today. FBI agents, please provide whatever information you can legally share regarding your investigation." During the recess, Walter sat with Grace in the hallway. "You're pregnant?" he asked softly. Grace nodded, tears flowing. 8 weeks. I found out yesterday. I haven't told anyone. I was afraid the stress. After losing the baby before Marcus died. Lily would say it's a sign, Walter said, pulling her into a hug that surprised them both. She believed in signs. Nathan Torres sat with his FBI agent sister, who was lecturing him about federal crimes while secretly proud of his courage. Emma Brooks had arrived, her veterinary suspension meaning nothing in the face of her friend's need. Margaret's lawyer, Preston, approached Sarah Coleman. "My client's husband, Richard Hayes, has been cooperating with the FBI. He's willing to testify about the animal killings, the insurance fraud, everything. He's been documenting it for years, waiting for the right moment." Sarah's eyes widened. "Why didn't he come forward sooner?" "Fear," Preston said simply. "Margaret has connections everywhere. But seeing that dog protect her puppies, seeing your client risk everything, it gave him courage. He's in protective custody now. But he wanted you to know the puppies are safe. Margaret won't hurt another animal." When court reconvened, Judge Morrison's decision was swift and decisive. Based on the evidence presented, including documentation from the Canadian Therapy Dog Certification Program that predates any claims by Mrs. Hayes, and considering the criminal investigation now underway, I rule in favor of the defendant. The dog known as Aurora and her 7 puppies belong with Grace Mitchell. Furthermore, this court recommends full investigation into what appears to be systematic fraud perpetrated by Mrs. Hayes. The courtroom erupted in celebration. Aurora, who had been kept in a room nearby with her puppies, was brought in. She went straight to Grace, then to Walter, then did something extraordinary. She walked to Judge Morrison's bench and sat, offering her paw. Judge Morrison, the strict interpreter of law, stepped down from her bench and shook Aurora's paw. "You were Emma's angel," she said quietly, but the microphone caught it. "Thank you." The celebration in the courthouse lasted exactly 90 seconds before Walter Henderson collapsed. One moment he was hugging Grace, tears of joy streaming down his weathered face, and the next he was on the cold marble floor, clutching his chest, his Korean War veteran's cap rolled away, stopped by Aurora's paw as she rushed to his side. "Call 911, Grace screamed, dropping to her knees beside Walter. His face had gone ashen, sweat beading on his forehead despite the February cold. Aurora lay down next to him, pressing her warm body against his side, whimpering softly. "My heart!" Walter gasped, his hand finding Aurora's fur. "Lily. Tell Lily." "Don't talk," Grace said, holding his other hand. "Help is coming. You're going to be fine." The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes that felt like hours. As paramedics worked over Walter, Aurora refused to move away until Grace physically pulled her back. The old veteran was conscious but struggling, his eyes finding Aurora one last time before they loaded him into the ambulance. "Take care of them," he whispered to Grace. "The letter. In my house." Lily's letter. At Winter Haven General, the same hospital where Lily had worked, Dr. James Patterson delivered the diagnosis: massive heart attack requiring immediate surgery. The stress of the trial, the emotional upheaval at his age, his heart couldn't take it. He explained to Grace, who stood in the waiting room still wearing her funeral dress from court. "We need to operate within the hour." "What are his chances?" Grace asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. 50-50. Dr. Patterson said honestly. "Maybe less given his age and the severity. Does he have family we should contact?" "I'm his family," Grace said firmly. "Aurora and I are all he has." During the 5-hour surgery, Grace maintained a vigil in the waiting room. Emma had taken Aurora and the puppies home, but Aurora had been inconsolable, howling in a way that spoke of ancient grief. Finally, Emma brought Aurora to the hospital, arguing with security about therapy dog credentials until Dr. Patterson himself intervened. "That's Aurora?" he asked, recognizing the dog from Lily's days at the hospital. "Let her in. If anyone has earned the right to be here, it's her." Aurora curled up at Grace's feet in the waiting room, her amber eyes never leaving the surgery doors. 3 hours in, Grace felt the first cramp. She ignored it. 20 minutes later, another one, stronger. She was only 8 weeks pregnant. This couldn't be happening. Not now. When Walter finally came out of surgery, Dr. Patterson's expression was guarded. He survived, But the next 24 hours are critical. He's asking for someone named Lily. Grace's heart broke. That's his granddaughter. She died 2 years ago. And the letter, Dr. Patterson asked. He keeps mentioning a letter. Emma volunteered to check Walter's house while Grace sat with him in the ICU, against all protocols. The nursing staff, many of whom had worked with Lily, allowed Aurora into the sterile room. The dog sat perfectly still beside Walter's bed, occasionally resting her massive head on the blanket near his hand. Walter's eyes fluttered open near midnight. "You're still here," he whispered to Aurora, then looked at Grace. "Both of you. Where else would we be?" Grace asked, fighting back tears. "The letter," Walter said weakly. "Lily wrote it. For whoever found Aurora, she knew. Somehow she knew Aurora would find her way to someone who needed her." Emma returned with the sealed envelope she'd found in Walter's safe. "For Aurora's guardian," written in feminine handwriting. Grace opened it with trembling hands and read aloud. "If you're reading this, Aurora has chosen you. She doesn't trust easily, not after some of the things we've seen together in the children's ward. But if she's with you, it means you need her as much as she needs you. Maybe you're broken. Maybe you've lost something or someone. That's okay. Aurora specializes in broken hearts. She helped me through Mom's death, through Dad's suicide, through nights when I wondered if the pain in this world was worth fighting. She was my answer. Love is always worth fighting for. Take care of her. Let her take care of you. And know that somewhere, somehow, I'm grateful to you for giving her a home when I no longer can. Lily Henderson." RN. Walter's heart monitor beeped erratically as tears rolled down his cheeks. "She knew," he whispered. "My baby girl knew she wouldn't. She prepared." "Don't," Grace said firmly. "You're going to be fine. You have to be. Aurora needs you. The puppies need you. I need you." But the cramps were getting worse. Grace excused herself to the bathroom and saw blood. Her legs nearly gave out. Not again. She couldn't lose another baby. Not after everything. Emma found her there, crying silently on the bathroom floor. "We need to get you to obstetrics. Now." Dr. Sarah Kim, the obstetric specialist, was blunt. "You're showing signs of a threatened miscarriage. The stress from the trial, the emotional upheaval your body is treating the pregnancy as unsustainable. Complete bed rest immediately. No stress, no standing, nothing." "But Walter," Grace started, "we'll have to recover without you there." "Doctor," Kim said firmly, "you have to choose: risk the pregnancy by maintaining this vigil, or protect your baby." It was an impossible choice. Grace thought of Marcus, of the baby they'd lost before his accident, of the emptiness that followed. Then she thought of Walter alone in the ICU, of Aurora's puppies who needed constant care, of all the responsibilities crashing down on her. "I can't do this," Grace sobbed to Emma. "I'm going to lose everything again. I always do." Emma held her friend tightly. "You're not alone this time. We'll figure it out." But the complications continued. That same week, Emma faced her license review hearing. The veterinary board, influenced by Margaret's remaining allies, seemed determined to make an example of her. Providing free services to undocumented immigrants shows a blatant disregard for professional standards. The board president stated, without Emma, Grace had no one to help with the puppies while on bed rest. Aurora, sensing the crisis, took over completely, nursing, cleaning, protecting her babies with fierce devotion while barely eating herself. She divided her time between the puppies and lying beside Grace's bed, alert to every sound of distress. Then came the knock on the door that Grace had been dreading. Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services stood on the porch with a clipboard and a concerned expression. "Ms. Mitchell, we've received a complaint about dangerous animals in a home with a pregnant woman." "Who complained?" Grace asked from her mandatory position on the couch. "Anonymous," Janet said, though her expression suggested she had suspicions. "I need to assess whether this environment is safe for a child." The investigation was humiliating. Janet documented everything: the 7 puppies in the living room, Aurora's protective behavior, the medical equipment from Hope's recovery still scattered about. "You're on bed rest but caring for 8 dogs?" Janet asked skeptically. "Aurora is caring for them," Grace said defensively. You just took on massive responsibility while pregnant and alone," Janet interrupted. "Ms. Mitchell, I grew up in foster care too. I know the fear of losing everything, of being deemed unfit, but you have to think about your baby." Grace felt the familiar spiral of panic. They were going to take her baby, just like her mother had been deemed unfit. The cycle continuing, generation after generation of inadequate mothers losing their children. "You can't take my baby," Grace whispered. "Please." "I'm not here to take anyone," Janet said more gently. "But you need support. Real support. Not just a dog, no matter how remarkable she is." That night, Grace reached her breaking point. Walter still critical. Emma's license hearing going badly. CPS scrutinizing her every move, and the cramps returning with vengeance. She lay in bed, feeling the fragile life inside her seeming to slip away with each wave of pain. "I'm just like her," Grace whispered to Aurora. "My birth mother, too broken to keep anything alive." Aurora stood up from her puppies, walked to Grace's bed, and did something she'd never done before. She climbed up carefully, arranged her massive body along Grace's side without putting pressure on her stomach, and began humming a low, throaty sound that wasn't quite a whine or growl but something older, more primal. A mother's song to a mother. Grace wrapped her arms around Aurora and sobbed into her fur. "Don't let me lose this baby. Please, I can't lose anything else." Aurora stayed there all night, leaving her puppies only when absolutely necessary, always returning to Grace's side. When the cramps finally subsided near dawn, when the bleeding stopped, when Grace's baby somehow held on despite everything, she knew it wasn't medicine or bed rest that saved them. It was love, stubborn, unreasonable, unscientific love. The kind Lily had written about, the kind that was always worth fighting for, even when everything seemed lost. Emma Brooks sat in the Winter Haven General Hospital records room at 3 a.m, surrounded by boxes of old files. She'd convinced the night clerk, a former client whose cat she'd saved pro bono, to let her search through archived admission records. Something about Grace's story nagged at her, a connection she couldn't quite place. Then she found it. A birth certificate from 32 years ago, baby girl Mitchell, abandoned at 3 weeks old. The admission paperwork was signed by the receiving nurse Lily Henderson, age 23. Emma's hands shook as she read further. Lily had been a new nurse then, fresh from training, and this abandoned baby had been one of her first cases. But that wasn't the revelation that made Emma gasp. Attached to the file was a handwritten note in Lily's distinctive script: birth mother identified through DNA match, Rebecca Hayes, sister of Margaret Hayes. Mother attempting to reclaim custody. Will testify on her behalf. Emma drove straight to Walter's house, where she found more pieces of the puzzle in Lily's old room. Journals, letters, court documents Lily had saved. The story that emerged was staggering in its cruelty. Rebecca Hayes had been 16 when she gave birth to Grace. Margaret, 12 years older and already married to wealth, had forced her sister to give up the baby. "You're an embarrassment," Margaret had written in the letter Lily had somehow obtained. "That baby is better off without you. You're weak, just like Mother was." But Rebecca had fought back. For 3 years, she worked multiple jobs, got clean from the drugs Margaret claimed she used, petitioned the courts, and Lily had been prepared to testify that Rebecca was fit, that she'd seen her visit the foster home where Grace was placed, watching from across the street because the restraining order Margaret had orchestrated prevented closer contact. The night before the custody hearing, Rebecca Hayes died in a car accident. The brake lines had been cut. It was ruled a suicide by a coroner who, Emma discovered, was on Margaret's payroll at the time. Grace had been 3 years old, shuffled into the permanent foster care system, never knowing her mother had died trying to get her back. Walter was awake when Emma arrived at the ICU with the documents. His color had improved, and Aurora still maintained her vigil beside his bed. "You knew," Emma said without preamble. You knew who Grace really was? Walter's eyes filled with tears. Lily figured it out years ago. She'd been searching for that baby she couldn't help save. When Grace moved to Winter Haven, when Lily saw her at the grocery store, she knew immediately. Same eyes as Rebecca. Same stubborn chin. Why didn't you tell Grace? Emma demanded. Would you? Walter asked weakly. Tell her that the woman terrorizing her is actually her aunt, that her mother died potentially murdered trying to get her back, that Lily knew but died before she could. He trailed off, monitors beeping his distress. There's more. Walter continued after his heart rate stabilized. Margaret knew too. The moment Grace showed up in court. That's why she pushed so hard. It wasn't about Aurora or the puppies. It was about finishing what she started 32 years ago, destroying any trace of Rebecca, including her daughter. Meanwhile, Judge Eleanor Morrison sat in her home study, reviewing the case files one more time. Something felt incomplete. She pulled up Margaret Hayes's business records, cross-referencing them with missing dog reports from the past 5 years. The pattern was clear. Dogs reported stolen in one state would appear in Margaret's breeding records months later in Illinois. Her phone rang. It was her daughter Emma, now 24, and in law school. Mom, I need to tell you something about that dog Aurora. Eleanor listened as her daughter described the days in the children's cancer ward, how Aurora had known which children wouldn't make it, how she'd spend extra time with them. She saved my life. Mom, not medically, but spiritually. When I wanted to give up, she'd climb into my bed and refuse to leave. Lily would get in trouble for it, but she never stopped Aurora. Why didn't you tell me this during the trial? Eleanor asked. You always said personal feelings don't belong in the courtroom. Emma replied. But Mom, there's something else. I saw Margaret Hayes at the hospital once, arguing with Lily. She said Lily had no right to interfere in family business. I didn't understand then, but I do now. Lily was protecting someone from Margaret. The next morning brought a shocking development. Richard Hayes, Margaret's estranged husband, walked into the FBI field office with 3 boxes of evidence. Agent Rachel Torres couldn't believe what she was seeing: photographs of dogs Margaret claimed had died, very much alive but bearing scars from fighting rings, financial records showing payments to dog fighting operations, and most damning, a journal Margaret kept detailing which dogs were useless and how she dealt with them. She killed 17 dogs in the past 3 years, Richard said, his voice hollow. When they couldn't breed anymore, she'd take them to the backwoods, said she was putting them out of their misery. But really, she enjoyed it. The control, the power over something helpless. Why come forward now? Agent Torres asked. That woman in court, Grace Mitchell. Margaret mentioned her maiden name once when she was drunk. Said the Mitchell brat got what she deserved. Growing up without a mother. I researched. Found out about Rebecca, my sister-in-law. I never knew her. But Margaret's hatred for her was poisonous. When I saw Grace fighting for that dog, I realized she was Rebecca's daughter. I couldn't let Margaret destroy another generation. Richard also revealed that Margaret had known Aurora's location for months through a private investigator but waited until the puppies were born to maximize their value. She never cared about getting Aurora back. She wanted to hurt Grace publicly, legally, devastatingly, like she did to Rebecca. Back at the hospital, Walter's recovery seemed to accelerate after Aurora was officially allowed to stay in his room. The nurses documented something remarkable: his vital signs improved whenever Aurora was present, deteriorated when she had to leave to nurse her puppies. Dr. Patterson, a skeptic about animal therapy, admitted he couldn't explain it medically. Maybe we don't need to explain everything, Walter said, stroking Aurora's head. Lily always said love was the best medicine. Corny, but look at me, 72 years old, massive heart attack, and I'm getting better because a dog won't let me die. Grace's pregnancy had stabilized, though she remained on modified bed rest. The cramping had stopped completely after Aurora's all-night vigil. Dr. Kim called it a miracle. Medically, you should have miscarried, The stress levels, the physical strain, but somehow, that baby is holding on stronger than ever. The veterinary board's emergency meeting about Emma's license took an unexpected turn when 3 board members recused themselves, admitting they'd received campaign contributions from Margaret Hayes for local elections. The remaining members, faced with public outcry and evidence of discrimination, voted unanimously to reinstate Emma's license immediately. "We apologize for the systematic bias in our review process," the board president read from a prepared statement. Dr. Brooks's compassionate care, regardless of her patient's owner's immigration status, represents the highest ideals of veterinary medicine. Emma rushed straight from the hearing to Grace's house, where she found her friend sitting up for the first time in days, surrounded by Aurora's puppies. Hope, the smallest, had claimed Grace's lap and refused to move. "We won," Emma said, tears streaming. "Everything. Walter's recovering, my license is back. Margaret's going to federal prison, and you're going to have this baby." But Grace looked troubled. "Emma, I need to know something. That day Margaret came here, she looked at me like she knew me. Not just as Aurora's rescuer, but like she recognized me." Emma sat down carefully, pulling out the documents she'd found. "Grace, there's something you need to know about your birth mother." The truth broke Grace into pieces and reformed her all at once. Rebecca Hayes, her mother, had been barely more than a child herself when Margaret forced her to give up Grace. The spiral of addiction Margaret had used to justify taking Grace had actually started after the baby was taken, not before. Rebecca had gotten clean, fought the system, died trying to reclaim her daughter. "She wanted me," Grace whispered, holding a photo Emma had found Rebecca holding infant Grace in the hospital. Tears on her young face but smiling. "She actually wanted me. She died trying to get you back," Emma said gently. "And Grace, Lily knew. She tried to find you for years after Rebecca died. When you moved here, Lily recognized you immediately. She was planning to tell you everything, but then she died saving that child," Grace finished. She looked at Aurora, who had padded over to rest her head on Grace's knee. "She sent Aurora to find me instead." That evening, Margaret's lawyer, Preston, visited Grace with one final revelation. "I'm withdrawing from Mrs. Hayes's case and testifying for the prosecution," he said. "What she did to you, to your mother, to those dogs, it's unconscionable. But there's something else. Margaret has a safe deposit box. Richard gave me the key. Inside are documents proving Margaret paid off the coroner who ruled your mother's death a suicide. She might be charged with murder." Grace felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Just emptiness. "She killed my mother for trying to love me. Your mother's death was ruled a suicide because she'd struggled with addiction," Preston said carefully. "But the addiction came after losing you, not before. And the brake lines. Margaret had a mechanic on payroll who disappeared shortly after. Draw your own conclusions." As Preston left, Judge Morrison arrived unexpectedly. "I owe you an apology," she said simply. "I pride myself on seeing facts over feelings, but I missed the biggest fact of all. Margaret Hayes was using the legal system as a weapon. Your mother, Lily. Now you. 3 generations of women she tried to destroy through legal means." Aurora walked over to the judge and sat, offering her paw again. Judge Morrison knelt and shook it solemnly. "You knew all along, didn't you? You knew who needed saving." That night, Grace sat surrounded by truth and chosen family. Walter had been moved to a regular room and would be released in days. Emma was planning to reopen her clinic with Aurora as the official therapy dog. The puppies were thriving, each one developing distinct personalities. Hope, the smallest, had claimed Walter as her person, refusing to leave his side during visits. "Your mother would be proud," Walter said when Grace visited him with the truth. "Rebecca, I mean, but Lily too, both your mothers, in a way." Grace touched her stomach, where her baby grew stronger each day. 3 generations of fighters," she said. "My mother, me, And this little one. All saved by love that refused to give up. Aurora curled up between them, her 7 puppies arranged around the hospital bed in defiance of every regulation. But no one said anything. Some things like love, like family, like the bonds that transcend blood and law were beyond rules. The federal courthouse in Chicago was a different world from Winter Haven's small-town courtroom. Margaret Hayes sat in an orange jumpsuit, her perfectly coiffed hair now gray at the roots, her manicured nails replaced by bare, bitten-down fingers. The mighty had fallen far. Federal prosecutor Diana Morrison, no relation to Judge Morrison, presented the case with devastating precision. Mrs. Hayes operated a criminal enterprise spanning 5 states, 47 dogs confirmed stolen, insurance fraud totaling $1.2 million, connections to dog fighting rings that resulted in the deaths of hundreds of animals, and potentially the murder of Rebecca Hayes, though that case is being tried separately. Margaret's new lawyer, a public defender, attempted damage control. My client was a successful businesswoman who made poor choices. Poor choices? Diana interrupted. She kept a journal detailing which dogs she personally euthanized when they couldn't breed anymore. 17 dogs in 3 years, that's not a poor choice, that's serial animal cruelty. The evidence was overwhelming. Richard's testimony, the documents, the financial records, the connections to fighting rings. It painted a picture of a woman who viewed living creatures as nothing more than revenue streams. When the jury returned after just 3 hours of deliberation, no one was surprised by the guilty verdict on all counts. 7 years federal prison, the judge announced. Lifetime ban on owning or working with animals. Restitution to all victims totaling $2 million. Margaret finally broke, screaming about persecution and conspiracy, but Grace wasn't there to see it. She'd given her testimony via video deposition, unable to travel due to her pregnancy. She watched the verdict on her laptop, Aurora beside her, and felt nothing but relief. It was over. The interesting development came from Margaret's assets being liquidated. Judge Morrison established the Rebecca Hayes Memorial Fund with the proceeds dedicated to helping young mothers fight for custody of their children. Grace was named administrator, a role she accepted with tears streaming down her face. Your mother's name will help other mothers, Walter said when she told him. That's justice. The final legal matter was settled quietly. Grace officially adopted Aurora, with the Canadian Therapy Dog Program expediting new certification papers. Each puppy was registered with carefully vetted families who'd been selected by a committee including Grace, Walter, Emma, and surprisingly, Judge Morrison, who'd volunteered her time. The law failed you once, Judge Morrison said. I won't let it fail these puppies. September 15th arrived with unusual heat for Illinois autumn. Grace woke at 4 a.m. to wet sheets and the unmistakable cramping of labor. But this time, it wasn't fear she felt, it was anticipation. Aurora was already alert, pacing the bedroom with anxious energy. It's time, girl, Grace whispered. And Aurora immediately went into action. The dog ran across the street to Walter's house, scratching at his door until he answered. Grace, he called out. Seeing Aurora's agitation, Aurora barked once sharp, urgent, then ran back toward Grace's house. Walter, now fully recovered and spry for his 72 years, grabbed his phone and the hospital bag they'd prepared, following Aurora's lead. They reached the hospital in record time, Walter driving while Aurora sat in the back seat with Grace, her massive head providing a pillow during contractions. The nursing staff, many of whom remembered Lily, welcomed Aurora without question. That's Lily's dog, one senior nurse whispered. She belongs here. Labor progressed quickly, too quickly. When Dr. Kim checked Grace at 6 a.m., she was shocked. You're fully dilated. This baby's coming now. But Dr. Kim was suddenly called to an emergency C-section. The nurse tried to find another doctor, but Grace's baby wasn't waiting. Emma, who'd been racing to the hospital, burst through the door just as Grace cried out. I delivered hundreds of puppies and kittens, Emma said, pulling on gloves with practiced efficiency. One human baby can't be that different. With Walter holding one hand, Aurora pressed against her side, and Emma coaching her through. Grace brought new life into the world as the sun broke through the hospital windows. Baby Lily emerged with a cry that could have woken the entire ward. Strong, healthy, perfect. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, Emma announced, tears streaming as she placed the baby on Grace's chest. Born at 6:47 a.m., sunrise exactly. The moment was profound in its simplicity. 4 generations in one room, Walter representing the past, Grace the present, baby Lily the future, and Aurora the constant that connected them all. Aurora, who'd been through so much, approached slowly, sniffing the baby gently, then lay down beside the bed with a contented sigh. Her job wasn't done, but a crucial chapter was complete. The nursing staff pretended not to notice when Aurora was the first to properly meet baby Lily, touching her tiny hand with her wet nose. The baby's fingers instinctively grasped Aurora's fur, and everyone in the room felt the circle of life completing itself. Within an hour, the waiting room filled with Winter Haven residents, Tom from the hardware store, Father Williams, Judge Morrison with her daughter Emma, Nathan Torres with his sister Agent Rachel Torres, even Jim Harrison, the deputy who'd refused Margaret's demands. The community that had rallied around Grace now celebrated new life. Richard Hayes sent flowers with a note for Rebecca's granddaughter. May she know only love. The puppy's adoption day was planned for October 1st, when they'd be fully weaned and ready. But really, their families had been chosen weeks before through a careful process that matched personality to purpose. Hope, the smallest who'd almost died at birth, was Walter's from the moment she'd survived her pneumonia. At 12 weeks, she was still tiny but fierce, with a spirit that reminded everyone of her mother's determination. Walter officially adopted her, though she spent most of her time at Grace's house anyway. Frost went to James Martinez, a Marine veteran with PTSD who'd been following the story online. He drove from Michigan to meet the puppies, and Frost chose him, climbing into his lap and refusing to move. He knows, James said simply. He knows I need him. Snow's destiny was clear from the start. She would follow in Aurora's paw prints at the Children's Hospital. The therapy dog program had already begun her training, and she showed the same intuitive understanding of pain that Aurora possessed. Dr. Patterson himself sponsored her certification. Blizzard, the largest and most energetic, went to the Winter Haven Fire Department for search and rescue training. Chief Anderson had lost his previous canine partner a year ago and saw something special in Blizzard's intelligence and drive. Crystal chose her family, the Johnsons, whose 8-year-old son Timothy was autistic and had connected with Crystal during a visit. She would curl up beside him during his sensory overloads, providing the deep pressure that calmed him. His first full sentence was, "Crystal is my friend." Storm went to Eleanor Fitzgerald, an 81-year-old widow who'd lost her husband the previous year. Storm was gentle with her arthritis but protective of her solitude, the perfect companion for someone rebuilding their life. Winter, the calmest of the 7, became Emma's clinic dog. She had an uncanny ability to comfort anxious animals, often lying beside scared cats or injured dogs during treatment. Emma called her the nurse Lily would have loved. Each adoption came with a contract. The families would gather monthly for puppy reunions, ensuring the siblings maintained their bond. It was unconventional, but then everything about Aurora's story had been. 1 year later, October 15th, baby Lily's first birthday party transformed the Winter Haven Community Center into a celebration of survival, love, and chosen family. Balloons reading 1-year-old mixed with photos from the journey, Aurora in the snow, the puppy's first days, Walter in the hospital, Grace at the trial, and hundreds of moments between. All 7 puppies, now fully grown, returned for the reunion. Hope had never left, of course, but seeing Frost, Snow, Blizzard, Crystal, Storm, and Winter together again brought tears to everyone's eyes. They remembered each other, playing with the same gentle roughness they'd shown as puppies. Aurora watched her children with the satisfied expression of a matriarch surveying her legacy. At 5 years old, she was in her prime, healthy, loved, and finally at peace. The scars from her journey had faded, covered by a glossy coat that Emma's careful nutrition had restored. Walter had become the grandfather Grace never had, teaching baby Lily to walk with Hope's patient assistance. The tiny puppy who'd almost died had grown into a small but mighty dog who seemed to understand her role as baby Lily's guardian. The two were inseparable. Hope sleeping under the crib every night. Grace's graphic design business had flourished, specializing in pet portraits that captured the soul of animals. Her most famous piece, a painting of Aurora with her 7 puppies, had been auctioned for $30,000. With proceeds going to the Rebecca Hayes Memorial Fund, Emma's clinic had become the heart of Winter Haven's animal community, with Aurora serving as the official therapy dog for anxious patients. She'd expanded to include a program for low-income families, funded partly by donations from around the country who'd followed Aurora's story. The surprise announcement came during cake cutting. Grace stood, holding baby Lily, with Daniel Harrison beside her, Jim Harrison's son, the veterinary student who'd been quietly courting Grace for months. "We're getting married," she announced to cheers and applause. Aurora would be the ring bearer. Of course, Hope would be the flower girl's companion. The wedding would be at the community center, where the town had rallied around them, where justice had prevailed over money, where love had conquered law. As the party continued, Grace found herself in the garden with Walter, watching baby Lily take her first independent steps from Aurora to Hope and back again, the two dogs standing guard like furry bookends. "She said Rora this morning," Grace told Walter. "Her first word." Walter wiped his eyes. "Lily would have loved that. My Lily, I mean." "They're both your Lilies," Grace said, squeezing his shoulder. "The one who saved a child, and the one who gets to grow up surrounded by love, the one Aurora lost, and the one Aurora helped bring into the world." Aurora patted over, carrying a toy she'd retrieved from inside the old collar she'd pushed toward Grace in the snow nearly 2 years ago. It was baby Lily's favorite toy now, the leather soft from tiny hands and puppy teeth. Grace knelt beside Aurora, baby Lily toddling over to join them, Hope and Walter completing the circle. "Thank you," Grace whispered to Aurora, "for choosing me, for trusting me, for saving all of us." Aurora's response was simple and perfect. She lay down, creating a furry pillow for baby Lily to fall onto, which she did with delighted giggles. Hope curled up beside them. Walter lowered himself to the grass with a grateful groan. Grace sat beside them all, her family not of blood but of choice and chance and courage. The sun set over Winter Haven, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Inside the community center, 7 grown puppies played with their adopted families. Outside, 4 generations shared a moment of perfect peace, the kind that comes not from avoiding storms, but from surviving them together. In the distance, a church bell chimed 7 times. Aurora lifted her head at the sound, then settled back down with a contented sigh. Her journey from the snowy roadside to this moment had been long and painful, but every step had led here to family, to purpose, to love that transcended species and circumstances. Baby Lily's small hand found Aurora's fur, gripping it with the same instinctive trust her mother had shown picking up a desperate pregnant dog on a winter's day. "Rora," she said again, clearer this time. Aurora's tail thumped once against the grass, a period at the end of a sentence, a chapter closed, a story complete. But also, somehow, a beginning. Because love like this doesn't end. It just keeps finding new ways to save us all. You know, I've told you this story about Aurora and Grace because sometimes we need reminding that family isn't always what we're born into, it's what finds us when we're frozen by the roadside of life. Grace lost her husband and unborn child. Walter lost his granddaughter. Aurora lost her person. Each of them could have remained broken, alone in their grief. But here's what I've learned from their journey. Gratitude isn't about being thankful for what we have. It's about recognizing the miracles that show up disguised as burdens. Grace gave up her last job interview to save a dying dog. That sacrifice became her salvation. Aurora trusted a stranger with her unborn puppies. That desperate trust created a family spanning generations. We spend so much time documenting ownership papers, certificates, proof of belonging, but Aurora knew something we forget: real family recognizes itself without documentation. It's Walter showing up at 2 a.m. with a medical kit. It's Emma risking her career for what's right. It's a town choosing compassion over law. Baby Lily's first word wasn't mama or dada. It was Rora. Because sometimes the greatest gratitude is simply recognizing who saved us and having the courage to love them back.